Alright, now, sorry we can't have that kind of a segment today. I'll try.
Oh!
Yeah, there you
yeah.
go. Good. Hey, sometimes you just gotta fake it. Alright, so we're talking Reconstruction today. There's whatever they're doing is not nearly as exciting as Reconstruction, I can tell you that. So, hi Randy. Where were you? Okay, thank you. So Reconstruction begins even before the war ends. Before the war ends, the 13th Amendment is passed. The 13th Amendment, and you're going to want to know these amendments, by the way. And hey, if you memorize them now, when you get over there to them laughing, you'll have it easy because you won't have to memorize these. You already know them. Just a hint, 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 hint. So the 13th Amendment, passed during the Civil War, prohibits slavery. If you've seen the movie Lincoln, that came out just a couple years ago, great movie, and it is about Lincoln and Congress's efforts to pass the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in all states. It abolishes slavery in all states. Also, removing slavery in that process as a part of Reconstruction, the 14th Amendment prohibited states from depriving any male citizen of any equal protection. So basically, it said that all males were now equal, regardless of race. Not females, but all males. It's kind of sad to think that we fight, 600,000 to 800,000 people die, and the only thing that happens is African American men gain the right to vote. Like, women are just completely forgot about. White women and African American women are forgotten about. But it's a good step, I guess. It's going to take until 1919, by the way, until women get the right to vote all across the country. But this was a good step. And the 15th Amendment finally granted the right to vote to African American males. Okay? African American males had the right to vote as a result of the 15th Amendment. So these three amendments effectively end slavery in an official capacity. And we tend to think, alright, well, these laws are passed, slavery's over, African Americans got it good, right? Everything's all equal. And in theory, that's correct. But in reality, life for African Americans in the South, especially after the Civil War, is almost identical. No, I should say almost identical. It's very, very similar to what it was like before the war. So slavery's over. It's illegal. These things are telling you African Americans, males, should be treated equally. It doesn't happen. Don't mistake that. Yes, Keith? Yep, and we're going to get to that. So sharecropping begins, and sharecropping basically works the exact same for African Americans. They're still doing the same work, sometimes on the same plantations, except they get paid a little, and they get a place to live, kind of, sort of. Sharecropping isn't much better or much different from slavery, though, for African Americans. So the reality of it is slavery ends in an official capacity, but the situation, the life that African Americans lead is not, in many cases, much different than what it was prior to the war. Alright, so another part of Reconstruction is that the South was split up into military districts. So when the war ended, the idea was we would bring not necessarily a ton of troops, but the military was brought into the South. The Union's military, or the United States military, was brought into the South to make sure that the South lived up to the expectations, that the South freed slaves, that the South allowed slaves to be equal, and that the South allowed all male slaves to vote. Military Reconstruction, as far as helping African Americans, is probably the most beneficial time period for them. You can see those military districts right here, and as soon as the military leaves, the South goes back, as we were talking about, as Keith mentioned, to sharecropping. Two situations that are very, very similar to what they had been prior to the Civil War. Okay, so what is Reconstruction? We've talked about it a couple times. Reconstruction is rebuilding the South, right? If you reconstruct something, you put it back together. So Reconstruction is that process of putting the South back together after the war. The South needed repaired not just from a slave standpoint as far as trying to fix that issue of slavery and how to free slaves and how to make things equal for everybody, but the South also needed repaired because where did we talk about most of the battles took place in the Civil War? What's that, Deb? The South. Okay? Almost all the battles take place in the South. So the South is the one that has to rebuild. Right? We talked about this yesterday a little bit. Sherman, when he marched from Atlanta to the sea, he destroyed everything in his path. Remember talking about those Sherman ties? Am I making it up? I said that, right?
Yeah.
Okay? Okay, good. Right? And they're destroying everything. Right? They destroyed everything in some places. So the South needs rebuilt. And that process of destroying everything on the warpath is a process called total war. Meaning they weren't going to leave anything left. Atlanta was burned to the ground by the North, by Sherman and his men. And other cities faced similar fates. So Reconstruction is putting the South back together economically, politically, socially, all around. And we know from yesterday who's missing for this Reconstruction process. I shouldn't say missing, who is not around anymore, might be a better word. Yeah, Lincoln, right? Lincoln's assassinated on April 14th. So Lincoln directs the country through the war. Lincoln wins re-election, yet Lincoln is assassinated and really doesn't have much of a role in the process of bringing the nation back together, which is what he had fought so hard for. Alright, so Lincoln's goal prior to his assassination, we just started into this, Lincoln's goal prior to assassination was to readmit states as quickly as possible. Right, he wanted to get the country back together as fast as he possibly could. Lincoln begins the Civil War with the intent of bringing the Union back together, of bringing the United States back together. When the war ends, his goal, as we're approaching that end, is we need to put it back together as fast as possible. And we need to put it back together as fast as possible. But Lincoln dies before that happens, so his plan here that we're going to talk about isn't necessarily going to be executed exactly the way that he had wanted it to. Okay? He had passed the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction, December 8 of 1863, basically stating that 10% of the voting public had to take an oath of loyalty, and that state would be recognized as being back in the Union. He also agreed to pardon all but the highest ranking military and civilian Confederate officers. So like the President of the South, Jefferson Davis, wasn't going to be pardoned. Does anyone know what Robert E. Lee's punishment was for fighting for the South during the Civil War? It's still there today if you go to Washington, D.C. Arlington National Cemetery, the National Cemetery for our troops, is actually in like his backyard. So that many of those who died in the Civil War were buried just like right outside of his house, his mansion. And if you ever go to Arlington, you can actually, I've been through Robert E. Lee's house there. That's just like literally, it's kind of not right there, but it's really close. So that's one of his punishments that Robert E. Lee faces for supporting the South in the Civil War, because he was courted by the North. The North tried to get him to lead their army. Alright, so Lincoln's plan, again, is once 10% of the states sign an oath of loyalty to the United States again, they'll be brought back in the country, and all but the highest ranking officers would be pardoned and basically forgiven. Now, why do you think he would do that? What I want you to do right now, I'm going to give you a minute here to discuss why Lincoln would be okay pardoning all Confederate soldiers. So anyone, if you're just a regular old soldier, Lincoln said, we forgive you, it's over, you know, let's move on. Why would Lincoln pardon all them? Talk about that for a minute with someone around you, and we'll discuss it here. Let's just turn. Talk to me. Alright, let's talk about this. Byron, what you guys talk about? Okay, didn't want to start another problem. This is a good way of kind of saying, hey, we've forgotten about it, it's over. Right, we're going to forgive you. This is a good way to move on from it. Good. Gabby, what you guys talk about? Yeah, like, there'd be too many people to punish everybody, right? If you were to put every single Confederate soldier into jail for what they did, there's not going to be much of a South left at that point in time. Good. Devin, you said something kind of different. What did you say?
That they didn't all volunteer, some of them just got recruited.
Right. Not everybody volunteered, right? The South was putting a draft in. Some people were forced into military service as well. So those are all good reasons as far as why he would have supported that idea. All right, so that's Lincoln's plan. Johnson takes over, right? Lincoln dies, Andrew Johnson becomes president. And the text, I think, gives an interesting reading, which is pretty accurate. For the most part, the public doesn't really care who the vice president is. The only time it really matters who the vice president is when the president dies in office and the vice president becomes president. The public didn't know much about Johnson. Johnson, like Lincoln, had grown up poor. Johnson had kind of, made his name through the South. He was a Southerner. He was the only Southern senator who didn't resign his position. He stayed in Congress and basically said to heck with the South. Johnson had gained popularity because he had criticized the institution of slavery, yet Johnson was not necessarily very pro-African American. Didn't feel that they should all gain equality after the war. So Johnson is not necessarily very pro-African American at all. Johnson's plan for his Confederate state to rejoin the Union, you don't need to memorize all the parts of this, okay? What I would do is just kind of get the idea, the difference between what Johnson felt and what Lincoln felt. Okay, so Johnson said that for a state to become a part of the Union, they had to write a new constitution, they had to elect a new state government, they had to repeal the Act of Secession, so they had to say basically we were wrong to leave. They had to cancel all war debts against the Union or the United States, saying basically we're going to pay for our own mess. And they had to ratify the 13th Amendment. Now, as a whole, that compared to this, right, Lincoln's plan compared to Andrew Johnson's plan, how do they sound? Really different, kind of sort of the same. Yeah, they're pretty much the same. Okay? They're pretty much the same. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a clue for down the road. Andrew Johnson becomes hated by everybody. Like literally everybody, north, south, everybody. And President Lincoln is like one of the most popular presidents of all time. They had the exact same plan though. Keep that in mind. Okay? As far as Lincoln, and so, I'm not sure where I was going there. Alright, so that's Johnson's plan, which again we said is pretty similar to Lincoln's plan. Now, here's Johnson's plan again and put up in another way. Don't worry about writing this down. Okay, but you can see Johnson versus his primary opponent during this time period would have been a group of people called the Radical Republicans. Now, radical, Haley, means what? What does it mean to be radical? No idea? Devin? Different, right? Radical is different. What would you add to that?
Kind of crazy.
Kind of crazy, out there. Okay? So if you had a radical idea, that's something that we're saying is like really, really different, really, really out there. Here are the radical ideas the radical Republicans had. African Americans should be free. They should be equal. The South should be punished for what they did to slaves. Does that sound very radical, saying that all men should be equal? Like today, that wouldn't be radical, I guess is what I'm trying to get across to you. The radical ideas of the radical Republicans were not really all that radical in today's standards, but back then they were. Alright, so the radical Republicans plan for Congress. So this is a group that opposes Johnson. They supported the Freedmen's Bureau, which helped out these African Americans. Remember, they are all of a sudden freed from slavery, where they were forced to do work on plantations. Now they're free, they can do any job they want to, but what's the problem? What are they lacking? Education. What else? That's the number one thing. They're lacking education. What do you need to do to survive as you get to be an adult? You need a job, right? So in order to have a job, what do you need first? You need education. From that education, what are you going to gain? What's that? Knowledge? A degree? How about skills? Don't you need skills? Like, you can't just all of a sudden, I can't like walk into NASA and say, hey, I'd like to be an engineer, right? Sign me up. I can help you put planes in the air. That's not gonna happen. Not smart enough for that. Right? I can't just walk into this classroom here one day and say, hey, I'd like to teach today. Right? Yeah, whatever. I'll just stand up and talk and have some fun and we'll be alright. Maybe it seems like that sometimes, right? Just saying stuff. Alright? But Keaton, watch it. Alright, so that the Freedmen's Bureau, the idea was to train African Americans so they were prepared for life where they could make their own choices and they were trying to learn how to be successful. Alright, they supported the Civil Rights Act, supported the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment we talked about. They wanted to divide the South into those military districts I showed you. Alright, so Johnson, long story short, Johnson doesn't get along very well with the radical Republicans. By not very well, I mean they would pass a law, he would veto the law, they would override his veto every time. Right, I want to say 9 or 10 times that happened, where Congress passed a law, the president vetoed the law, and Congress overrode the veto. What do you have to do? What majority do you need to override a presidential veto? Does anyone know? Keaton, what do you think? No, what number? What percentage of a vote do you need? It's 2/3. Yeah, 2/3, I believe. It's a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate. Today, I'm just here to tell you, there is nothing that could be overridden by a 2/3 majority in the House or the Senate. Right? No way. There's no way that Congress could get along well enough to say, oh, we can work together to override this veto. President Obama can veto pretty much anything he wants to, and it's not going anywhere right now. Right or wrong, or good or bad, that's just the way it is, because Congress is so divided. But Congress back then was not divided. The radical Republicans had a big majority. They were largely in power, so they were able to override all those things. Republicans, radical Republicans, thought that Johnson didn't punish the South enough. They felt that he wasn't being hard enough on them. So they finally find a reason they could attempt to impeach him. He fires the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. He couldn't fire the Secretary of War, long story short. Just a procedural thing. He couldn't do it the way he did. So he is impeached. Brendan Radke, what does it mean to be impeached? What's that? Was he taken out of office though? No. But they tried to, right? If you're impeaching someone, you're trying to kick them out of office. Basically saying you're doing something illegal, you've done something wrong, let's get rid of you. So the House of Representatives votes yes to impeach him. It then is taken to a trial in the Senate. The Senate, Johnson, doesn't look good for him. He wins by 1 vote. This happens in 1867. So he doesn't have much time left in office anyway. Right, there's a presidential election coming up in 1868. So basically, so they don't look bad. They didn't, so to kind of like not make it look like the country was completely unorganized, the Senate decides we're not going to impeach him. Johnson says, I'll stop standing in your way. Right, I'll get out of the way. I'll let you do what you want. So Johnson's kind of like just in theory president for the last year or so of his term. Now, who is, after Johnson, only one other president has been attempted to be impeached. Impeachment charges have been officially brought up. Nev? Bill Clinton. Alright? Dakota was going to say, I bet Dakota, see, I'm a mind reader. I'm going to say Dakota was going to say Richard Nixon.
Yep.
He was going to say that. And the reason he's wrong is Richard Nixon resigned before he could be impeached. Nixon would have been impeached. He would have been kicked out of office, no doubt about it. He realized that, so he resigned. Bill Clinton was impeached, but not found guilty, basically, kind of like Andrew Johnson. So, yeah, those are the only 2 people that have ever been impeached in American history, political history. Not the last 2, but the only 2. Bill Clinton was accused of having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. He lied about it under oath, and that was kind of where they went at him to try and for that. Not for the affair, but for lying about it under oath. So, and then basically they decided that lying under oath about that wasn't a strong enough incident to impeach him. And the Democrats had enough power where they could prevent it from happening. Yep. Alright, we're close. Alright, black codes. You don't need to write this down. Alright, but this is an example of a black code. So, the South has no more slavery, but the South is basically setting up a system where it's not slavery anymore, but it works a lot like slavery. Okay, you can read some of those examples up here. These freed men in some states, I believe in South Carolina, a African American had to prove that they had a job for the next year, or they would be forced to work on a plantation if they didn't have a job that they could prove for the next year. What does that sound like? Slavery, right? That's just slavery. That's not causing it. It's saying, well, if you don't have a job, you have to work here. And where they had to work, they didn't get paid very well, if at all. Blacks were not allowed to marry whites. Some southern states, most southern states, blacks couldn't hold office. I think the text talked about the first African American governor is elected in, I want to say, Louisiana, and he's the last African American governor of Louisiana until like 1990. Think about that. That happened in 1860, another 100 years before another African American is elected governor of Louisiana, which is a state that has a large population of African Americans. Probably over 50% would be my guess of the people living in Louisiana are African American. By the way, the line of the debate the other night, we watched the debate on Wednesday night, anybody? The best line of the whole debate, Carly Fiorina is the only woman in the race, and she got asked it was a really stupid question, but the question was, if any woman should be put on the $10 bill, who should that woman be? And she said, that doesn't mean anything. She said that candidates need to stop treating women as a minority group. Women make up over 50% of the people in this country. They're more than a minority group. That was a pretty cool line, I thought, in the debate the other night. That's completely random, but that just came to me all of a sudden. Let's see. And you can see just some of those other black code examples up there. Okay, so we're going to watch this video after, and then we'll have about 30 minutes or so to work on our similar papers. Yes, sir.